Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind? Should old acquaintance be forgot and days of old lang syne?
Welcome back to the Single Dad's online podcast, Online Dad, and I am the Online Dad. Happy New Year. It's 2022, and it is time for my annual New Year's resolution podcast. So at the end of every year, we always tend to reflect back on the personal events that happened to us. We tend to think on more of the negative events than the positive, and especially with the continuation of COVID-19, the vaccines, the boosters, the different variants that are still out there. Our lifestyles and our routines, in many cases, are still upside down. And the hope that at least to have some sort of normal holiday season has been marred with variations of sheltering in place, loved ones that have died, deployed, perhaps incarceration is something you're working through, the increased cost of everything or the lack of stuff on the shelves. Holiday visitation schedules may not have been what you thought they would be. Implied competition to make your holiday as special, if not more special, than your ex. Maybe you just lost your job, or there's additional money problems that are casting a huge cloud on your holiday. Maybe you were just in court simply trying to see your children. If the holiday did not or has not been what you hoped, New Year's is always that renewed reason to hope. New Year's Day symbolizes that fresh start, a do-over, so to speak. You look at your choices, the good and the bad, and you try and figure out how to make the upcoming year better. Single dad, sometimes that can be easier said than done. When I was a single dad, I made a lot of mistakes. Many of the ideas that'll be discussed today and in other podcasts that I have are lessons I learned the hard way. And my hope is you don't make the same mistake that I make. Now, don't get me wrong, I had a lot of successes as well, but I made just as many mistakes. There are no hard and fast rules to parenting. Every parenting dynamic is different. So even with these New Year's ideas for you, you might have to modify them. You might say that'll never work in my household. However you decide to look at it, just remember, these are just suggestions that have worked in the past, either by myself or through people that have emailed me with say, hey, this worked for me. I'm throwing them all out there and hoping to make that relationship with your children and your new year a little bit better. Remember, first and foremost, number one on this list is know that your children love you unconditionally. Many times it is your own perception of how we should raise our kids, how we should love our children, that often sets you up for failure. It's not a matter of what you give them or how much you spend on them, how often you see them, that make your parenting a success and or a failure. It's about building that relationship. So you've heard the term quality time versus quantity time. If you're having good quality time with your children, you're doing a great job. Especially at the holiday season when you're watching Hallmark and Lifetime and all of these feel-good movies they have at the holiday season, because that's what we see. And you see these situations that involve single parenting or a hiccup and it all is happy and everybody has a Merry Christmas. And that sometimes bubbles in us even further that how much of a fail you think you are. Keep those things as entertainment value. Whenever you watch something on TV, it's entertainment value. And keep it in that. Don't judge your ability of parenting and judge your ability of the holiday season on what you saw on Hallmark. Okay? You go into Hallmark to buy a card, go into a store to buy a Hallmark card for a birthday or an anniversary or whatever. You're looking for that perfect card to say the perfect thing. Well, same thing with these TV shows. They're trying to show you the perfect holiday. They throw a little drama in there to keep you engaged, but at the end, it's all going to be a happy ending. The other thing you want to do is review your parenting choices from last year. What worked? What didn't work? Did you try too much? Did you just give up? Always look for ways to modify or improve your parenting skills. I used to be a teacher, taught for 16 years. I often found that lesson plans that worked well one year for my students doesn't always mean it'll be just as successful for the next group of kids I'll have the following year. Parenting is the same way. So a strategy worked for you as a parent last year May not work this year, especially if your children are getting older into those teenage years. I can guarantee you a lot of the strategies that may have had some success or a lot of success may all of a sudden not work like it used to. The next suggestion is resolutions are made to be broken. I always say set a New Year's goal and make that goal obtainable. Always focus on one, I said one, realistic way to be a better parent. Now, if you think you can take on 2 or 3 based on what you're choosing, I'm not going to tell you no, but just take one. Just take one. And it doesn't have to involve money, and it doesn't have to involve taking your kids somewhere. It doesn't have to involve a great expense. It might be just something simple as call them every day. But just, one realistic way. Once you've achieved that goal, if you want to take on another one, go for it. Use the difficult times to teach life lessons. Okay, we're in the middle of a continuation of a pandemic. I shouldn't say in the middle anymore. It's a continuation of a pandemic. There might have been some other things going on in your world that were negative. Turn them into life lessons. Engage age appropriately how to make the best out of a bad situation. And what this does is 2 things. One is it's engaging your children on what's going on, but more importantly, you're teaching your children how to cope with those bumps in the roads. More often than not, a lot of these little life lessons as younger kids in school and in parenting and stuff are actually life lessons to be able to teach coping mechanisms as they get older. So don't try and shield them from those bumps in the roads. If you can engage them or it does impact them directly, you got to talk about it. You got to, work with them to show them how we cope to move on with it. Because life isn't fair. It's just not fair, plain and simple. Regardless of your socioeconomic background, regardless of how much money you make or don't make, life is just not fair. Next point, make time to call your children each and every day. Even if it's just to say hi and you love them. Even if they don't respond, just don't stop doing it. Just keep calling. I remember as a young dad, single dad, and I was working 3 jobs, and my mom would call me on a regular basis, and I wouldn't return the call or I wouldn't pick it up. To a point where she finally called and said, look, if you don't respond to me sometime today, I'm going to call the police and do a well-being check on you. And that was her way of saying, I haven't heard from you in a while. I'm worried it's time to call. So we all have done it. We've all have done it. And now your children might be doing it to you. It's not a slap in your face. It's not a sign of disrespect. It's just how the dynamic is. You are the parent. They are the child. So even if they don't respond, and if they do respond and it's a real, quick discussion, or you call them and leave a message and they text you and say, what do you want? Just leave it, hey, just looking to catch up with you and let you know that I love you. I love you too. I'll call you later. That's just the way it is. But they know that you're out there. They know that you're thinking about them. They must be completely happy with the dynamic of your relationship at that time, that they don't feel they need to talk to you. And while as a parent, it hurts, it's just part of your children, especially with adult children. So just don't stop doing it. Don't give up. Next point, as you take down your Christmas or other holiday decorations, have your children help you. One that teaches, taking responsibility for the house and engages them in that process, because it's always great to put them up and it's no fun pulling them down. Got to do both. While you're doing it, discuss with them what they liked about this year's holiday season and what could be different. Make it a casual, lighthearted, easy-breezy discussion. You can either make some mental notes, add it to that spiral notebook I always tell you should have, or simply put a piece of paper and a pen or pencil down on the table, and as you're discussing it, tell your children, hey, write that down. And then you put it somewhere, either in that notebook, put it in a drawer, someplace where you can retrieve it or go through it through the year and see, okay, out of this list, what can I do the following holiday season to make the holiday season better? And you might highlight what you know you can do. You know you can do that. And then when the holiday seasons roll around again, you can ask your kids, hey, pick one of the highlighted things to do this year. And if they say, well, can we do both? You're in control of that. And if you can't do both, you can just be honest with them why you can't do both. But highlight the ones that you know are realistic, and then you can do that. Okay? Sometimes our perceived failures are just that, our perceptions, and your children actually love the holidays and they thought they were great. And you might scratch your head and go, you got to be kidding me. But if they felt that it was okay or they felt it was fine, okay, doesn't mean you can't improve on it. But don't think just because you thought it was a bad holiday season that they thought it was a bad holiday season. Next suggestion, make sure your parenting skills are consistent and appropriate. Even if you feel the other parent is not as strict, you can't control what they're going to do. You can only control what you're going to do. And as long as your children are not neglected, stay the course of your parenting skills. What is right, what is wrong, what boundaries are boundaries that exist. Stay the course. And it does two things. One is consistency, which your children need. They know when I go to dad's house, this is the rule, period. But it also helps as your kids get older and they become teenagers and they're testing your authority and they're taking that line and they're trying to step across it. They know where the line is drawn. But if you've never had a line of boundaries for your children ever, because you always want to be their friend and not their parent, and then all of a sudden at 16 you say, no, you can't do that, that's going to be a harder nut to crack than if you were doing it all along. So it's real important that your children, when they're younger, you make those boundaries and those rules ahead of time, regardless of what your ex is doing. So if bedtime is 10 o'clock, bedtime is 10 o'clock. No ifs, ands, or buts. And I'm not saying on special occasions you can't bend the rules. I'm talking about day-to-day parenting. So you want to make sure that you're consistent because now you have a foundation. So as they get older and they're looking to bend those rules or change those rules, you've got a foundation to start it at. If you've never given those rules and never those boundaries, how do you set an expectation? So all of a sudden they want to, at 16, they want to go to a concert in another state with a bunch of friends. You don't want them to do that. And you tell them no. It's a harder argument to have because you've always let them do whatever they wanted up to that point. Next point, and I say this every year, go get a new spiral notebook, just like the ones you get your kids at the beginning of the school year, and a calendar, whether you print out the calendar or you buy one. Sometimes using the calendar on your phone is a little bit more difficult. That's why pen and paper calendar is usually, it works. And you write down everything that involves your children. Include your court dates, your visitation schedules, purchases, child support payments, any communications between your kids and your ex. Anything that has to do with raising your children, good or bad, needs to go in that notebook. I hope you'll never need it, but it's there just in case. Now, my hope is that you do these notebooks every year and you put them in a secure place where your kids can't find them, and then you send me a Nastygram email 10 years later and saying, what a waste of my time. Never had to use it. Okay? I want you to do that for me. But the one time you might need it to prove something that went on with the parenting of your children, something you bought, something you didn't buy, how often you saw them, whatever the issue becomes, you have that evidence. You have receipts, you have phone records, you have all of that stuff. And it's there. And I'm hoping after 10 or 20 years and your kids are raised, you're throwing them in the shredder, you put them in the recycling bin to get rid of them, and you never used them. But if you need something and all of a sudden you can't have easy access to it or you have to dig for it, it becomes a little more problematic. So make sure you have that spiral notebook. Especially if you and your ex are not getting along, it's even more important that you have them. Never involve any entry in this notebook with your children. Don't discuss any of those issues with your kids. It's between the adults. It's between the parents. It's your journal. It's not something you need to share with your kids or leave it so your kids can find it. And if you think you tell your kids to stay out of your office or don't go to your desk or go through your desk that they're going to do that, just assume they're going to get in there. So make sure it's someplace secure. Next point. Make sure you have access to your children's phones, tablets, and computers. You need to know their passwords, and you need to know where your children are going on the internet, where they're surfing, who they're talking to, who their friends are. Make sure you have the phone numbers of their friends and or their parents. Put them in your phones. And you can put a group together and go, Johnny's friends, Sally's friends. But you want to have those things. Your children need to understand that you can ask for those items and devices at any time and without warning. So if they leave it on the dining room table, you can go grab it and go look at it. They need to understand that. They can scream, you're invading my privacy, all they want. You are the parent, they are the child. So you have every right to go through their stuff. And chances are they didn't buy those things with their own money. And even if they did buy those things with their own money, that should be a hard and fast rule from the moment you get it to them. Now, remember when you were a child and a teenager and things that you hid from your parents to get away with, that maybe you did, and they become funny discussions when you're adults. Your kids are going to do the same thing. But there are far more sinister ways to get into trouble now with technology than there was when we were little. And, my own children are adults now, and cell phones and computers were all in their infancy in those days. And we didn't have to do the things that you all are probably having to deal with now. So it's real important that you're surfing on a regular basis where your child is going on those computers, tablets, the games they're playing, the people they're communicating with. You have to have all that stuff. You also need to have those frank discussions with your children, especially as they get older, about what you post on the internet and what that means when you do that. So, so if they're thinking about or they're having candid conversations or sending pictures that aren't really considered appropriate, that to understand that you post that, everybody's going to post it. Everybody's going to have access to it. There's no stopping it. Once it's out on the internet, there's no stopping it. You could probably Google your name right now, and if you have a Facebook page, a LinkedIn page, a Twitter page, your name's going to pop up. Your picture's probably going to pop up. Once it's posted on the World Wide Web, it's gone. It's out there and you can never be retrieved. And your kids, you need to understand that they post something that they might be embarrassed about or they might get in trouble over. Chances are it's a good idea not to do it. My grandmother used to always say, don't do anything you don't want published on the front page of the Chicago Tribune, which was her way of saying don't do anything that you want the world to know that you've done. My dad used to always say to me, he'd go, if you're going to steal or you're going to do something wrong, make sure it's worth getting caught. And to this day, 57 years old, I haven't figured out where that limit is, where it's going to be worth getting caught. The next point, never ever use your child to relay messages to your ex. Pick up the phone, send an email, send a text message to your ex. Remember, you are the adults. Don't remind them about child support payments. Don't say, hey, tell your dad to pay your child support, tell your mom to pay your child support. No, you call them directly and make that happen. At the same time, if it's about school schedules or conferences or games or stuff like that, yes, your children should give you that information because it's their activities. But, okay, how many times did you forget to tell your parents about a game you were in or conferences that were coming up or you forgot to hand them a piece of paper from your teacher? How often does that happen? It happens a lot. So you need to take the initiative to make sure you are online with your teacher, their teachers, their coaches, make sure you're on those contact lists. Now, if you have a divorce decree that says you can't, then work with the ex directly to make sure you have access to that stuff. But if there's no restrictions, there's no reason why you can't call the school, you can't notify the teacher, you can't notify the coach to get that information. You might have to provide a copy of the divorce decree to make sure that's the case. But that you should not be denied that information, let alone expecting somebody else to get it for you. Okay, next point. Never cut down the other parent in front of your children, whether it be the step parent or the actual parent. True or not, you're shooting an arrow through your kid's heart and into your ex's heart. They love both of you equally, so you might have an ex-wife or an ex-spouse, but they don't have an ex-parent. If there are issues with your ex, your kids are going to figure that out on their own. You don't need to remind them of that. So if they say, Mommy says you're blah, 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 and it's a negative, don't do, tit for tat. Just say, well, I'm sorry that your mom feels that way. It's a matter of perception, and I'll discuss it with your mom. And if they start wanting more information or just tell them, you know what, that's between your mom and I. And you let it go. And they may push you further for it, you let it go. Next point, make time to sit at the dinner table and talk. All the electronics are shut off and put away. They don't vibrate, they don't blink, they don't flash, they don't make little noises when you have messages. And then either make a meal together, which is a great thing to do. But even if you're just ordering pizza or Chinese, you're sitting at the table together and you're having conversation. And the conversation can be very lighthearted, from anything from what's going on with your sports team to something going on with how they're feeling about the divorce or the loss of a loved one, or COVID-19 and all the stuff that's going on in the world. 9 times out of 10, you may ask those questions and you'll get little or no response from your children. A lot of times it starts with you. And those first conversations at the dinner table might be very one-sided. But what happens is you start sharing with your children what you're thinking and feeling about certain things, age appropriately, of course. Then they're going to say it's okay to start sharing things with you and their opinions. And that's how that discussion starts. And I know sitting at the dinner table is foreign these days. You want to try and make one day to do that. So if you have your kids every other weekend or every weekend, pick Friday night, Saturday night, and if you're going to have dinner with them Sunday night, but pick one time a day out of those 3 days to have that meal. And if you can't do it because of other things going on, then pick one time, once out of that visitation cycle that you have that meal at the table. So shoot for once a day, hoping that you get at least once a week at that cycle. But you'd be surprised where those conversations can go. And your children are seeing things and hearing things more so now, and the divisiveness of going on in the world. It's important to have those discussions so they can get an opinion and disseminate all the information they're being bombarded with. And you know what? They may not agree with you. But if they don't agree with you, then you need to support your position with facts, and they need to support their position with facts. It's how we gain conversations and trust and reliability in what is being said out there. There's so much information for your children out there to disseminate. It's real important that they have those discussions so they can get their bearings when they get that information. Next, if you are not seeing your kids on a regular basis, or it's been months or even years since you last saw your children, whatever that reason may be, okay, they're not calling you back, so I'm done with them, you wrote them, whatever it is, okay, don't just show up and say, I'm back, and expect everything to be the way it was. Trust is to be earned. So regardless of what the divorce papers say or what you're entitled to for visitation of your children, if you haven't seen them in a long time, you have to start it slow. You have to build up that trust. That document is a legal document of words. What your children are thinking and feeling, good, right or wrong, good or bad, is emotional based. And emotions don't necessarily follow the rules. So you have to slowly build that up. So trust is earned. Take it slow, step at a time. And, they'll eventually come around once they show that you're consistent in what you are doing as a parent. Remember, it's not the amount of money or the amount of time you visit with your kids. It's about loving your children, building a relationship with your children. Anything worth doing is hard work. So if you're not getting along with the ex and it's always a fight to be able to see your children, I get it. I get the frustration, and it's just easy to walk away than it is to engage it. But when you walk away from that situation, you're walking away from your kids, and your children blame themselves for why you walked away. Yes, it might be unrealistic, but that's how they feel. So just understand it's going to be hard work to be a single parent. When you're a single parent, and when before you were a single parent, you saw your kids on a daily basis, communication was right then and there. When you become a single parent, you're not going to have the same access to your children. You're not going to have the same access to communication. And you've got to keep that in mind. It's not a dig on you or you're being treated unfairly. It's a new dynamic, and you have to reestablish the parental boundaries through 2 households. Next point is make time for those discussions about the new family dynamic. Even if it's been years since your divorce or the loss of your spouse, perceptions change as your children get older. Just because they don't bring it up doesn't mean it's a non-issue. And that goes back to that whole dinner table conversation. You've got to talk with them to say, how are you feeling about? Well, what do you think now, or where dad's living, or how our family is now? And you're going to get a lot of blank stares and staring at the wall and shrug shoulders the first time you do that. Again, that's where it comes down to. You start sharing at an age-appropriate level what you're thinking and feeling. And you may be doing the bulk of the talking the few times that you're doing this. But what will happen is, as they see you starting to open up and be trusting them with what you're thinking and feeling, they're going to start with you. And sometimes those conversations are going to get loud, frustrating. There might be even some tears involved. But that's how you get these discussions started. If they're just because they're not discussing it, just because they're saying everything is, everything's okay, doesn't mean everything's okay with your kids. You need to have those discussions. When they get older and they have heard things or seen things, they're going to have additional questions, and you have to be willing to listen and to answer those questions. Now, there's going to be certain things that they don't need to know about. There are issues of my parents' divorce that to this day, I don't know. I can make assumptions, but when I'd ask my mom about them or my dad about them, they would say that's between your mom and I, or that's none of your business. And even if I tried to spin it saying, well, I want to know because it impacted my life, it's none of their business. Again, they can make assumptions. Again, they can draw their own conclusions, but that doesn't mean you have to share that with them. Now that both my parents are gone, I'll never know those answers, but I'll be real honest with you. I don't need to know those answers. My parents got divorced. I have my gut feeling of what had happened that caused the divorce based on the discussions I had with my mom and some assumptions based on things I heard. And when I asked them outright about it, and they said that's between your father and I, that's none of your business, I had to respect it whether I liked it or not. So in closing, depending on your relationship with your kids or where you are in the court process of this whole thing, by just taking on one or two of these suggestions as your goal for the new year is going to start you on your way for building and maintaining the relationships with your kids. It's not an overnight success, and it will take some time. But just remember, your kids love you unconditionally. They will love you no matter what. And keeping that in the back of your head is also going to help you charge through this. So there is more information on my website. You can go to www.singledadsonline.org and email me, call me on some successes that worked for you, on some of the things that were going on in your world, and I can add them to those discussions every New Year's when I do another podcast. And check out that website for additional postings and other things going on in the single dad world. I want to wish you all a happy new year, and I hope that things will get better for you in that new year. And just remember, your children do love you unconditionally.
Hold my side. We'll talk a cup of kindness yet for days of old.